All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's small business webinar. My name is Paul LaChapelle. I'm with Montana State University Extension, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to the September webinar. Just a few housekeeping items. I'd like to remind you that we are recording today's small business webinar, and we'll be posting that archive link to our website, and you can see the website address in the Q&A box there in the lower left. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Small Business Development Centers, which are affiliated with the Montana Department of Commerce and the U.S. Small Business Administration, as well as the Montana Economic Developers Association, MEDA, MSU Extension, with additional support from the Great Falls Development Authority and the University of Montana. For tech support, you can call me or email me at the number and the email address that's in the Q&A box there in the lower left. You will have an opportunity to ask questions or provide comments anytime throughout this webinar. Our presenter encourages those questions throughout the webinar. So please use that Q&A pod on the left side of the screen. Again, you can just type any of your text in that box and just hit the enter button. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Barnett Sporkin Morrison is the director of the Great Falls Food and Agriculture Development Center with the Great Falls Development Authority. And he'll be talking today about innovation in Montana. His presentation title is Rethinking Innovation in Montana. And also I'll mention that you can download this entire presentation in the box just above the Q&A pod there, or box. If you just highlight the word Rethinking Innovation Montana in Montana.pdf, you can download that PDF of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Barnett. Barnett, you can unmute your microphone. I'll also point out that Barnett's email address, I'm not sure if he noticed this, but we just got this a minute ago. It should be greatfalls.org with an F. So neither of us caught that this morning. So
I apologize about that.
Anyway, not a problem. Barnett, take it away. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you now.
I do hope that my miswriting of my email address on this presentation does not foreshadow how this will go. But thank you very much. I want to thank Montana State University Cooperative Extension, as well as my colleague Jason Nitschke, the head of our Small Business Development Center here in Great Falls, for putting together this webinar. As Paul mentioned, I do serve as director of the Food and Ag Development Center here with the Great Falls Development Authority. And I just wanted to quickly mention, for those of you not familiar with GFDA, we take a regional focus to economic development to include the 13 counties that we consider as part of the trade area of Great Falls, which largely comprises the geographic area known as the Golden Triangle in the Rocky Mountain front. My program is funded through the Montana Department of Agriculture to focus on food and agriculture development, and we take a very wide breadth of viewpoint on what that includes, to include agriculture, bioscience, biofuels, food, and natural resources. And then we take a three-prong approach to that, similar to the rest of the work we do in GFDA, focusing on business retention and expansion, working with firms that are already in the marketplace, helping them to get to the next level. The second is actually business and industry recruitment, getting new companies, startups to come into the Montana marketplace and to provide high wage jobs. And the third is working with entrepreneurs and really trying to develop a true entrepreneurial ecosystem in north central Montana. And this presentation is a beginning of some of the efforts that myself with the Food and Ag Development Center, and then my colleague Jason Nitschke, who also recently has been promoted to Vice President of the Great Falls Development Authority, are trying to do to really start up an entrepreneur ecosystem in north central Montana, and especially in the rural areas of our region. With that background being said, I want to go ahead and kick this off. Innovation is a word that probably many of you have heard. It's being heavily used within the business community today, economic development at universities, and just in common conversations today. Over the past few weeks, I've asked random people how they define innovation, and everybody has kind of their own concept of it. Most of the people I talked to, including I had a long conversation with my parents trying to pick their brain about how they saw innovation, and they saw it mainly as an invention or a stroke of genius. And this was, the same conversation that I had with people from a wide spectrum. But for the context of today and really thinking about innovation in Montana, I want to delve a little bit into actually giving a definition. Innovation is not solely an invention. It is not only a technology. Innovation is a process comprised of stages. I remember during my upbringing, I didn't grow up in Montana. I grew up in the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming, but my parents knew a cast of characters that you would go out to their farm or ranch and see that they had created this invention that made something simpler, whether it was to keep a cup of coffee hotter, it was to improve something on an irrigation ditch or fix something on their truck. But they themselves were the only people that ever actually enjoyed that invention. So innovation is not just coming up with an invention, it's actually moving it into commercialization. And innovation is a process that has different stages of coming up with different products. One of the concepts that I like just to see at the bottom of that slide, you can say that out of MIT Sloan that they've said that innovation equals invention, times, or it's a product of commercialization. And there's a lot of focus on that invention side when we talk about innovation, and far less focus by entrepreneurs and even people within that we work with GFDA on that commercialization side of it. Again, innovation, the process is not just simply an act of genius, and it's not a process that's reserved for somebody that's looking at high growth, high technology. It's not just reserved for somebody that's in a laboratory. It's not just reserved for somebody that's an engineer or PhD or within the STEM community. For this sake of this conversation, I want to go ahead and define innovation as a process rooted in the identification of problems, the development of solutions, and the ability for those solutions to be accepted by and produce benefit within the marketplace. So when we go further into it, I want to focus on mainly the business to consumer context, or the BTC context, because we only have a set amount of time today to really get into some of the nuances of really understanding innovation within the B2B takes us in another trajectory. But I hope that some of the information I'm going to provide today, the goal of my talk is really just to give a new frame of reference, or to get people thinking a little bit differently about innovation writ large within our state potentially, as well as how we can work with businesses on an individual level, or how a business owner can look at analyze their own business and try to drive innovation. As we know, when we look at a business, we can talk about everything. We can talk about marketing, we can talk about business plans, we can talk about cash flow statements, but at the end of the day, there's really only one necessary and sufficient condition of a business, and that's having a paying customer. And that idea I want you to always carry in the back of your head throughout this talk, and then even anytime you think about innovation. And when we move beyond the customer, we have to remember that the customer, in this case the B2C, is actually, customers are people. This isn't some abstract entity out there. It's not an esoteric character. It's a person. It's your neighbor. It may be somebody that lives in Kathmandu, Nepal. They're people. And when we move into thinking about how these people make decisions in the basic microeconomic sense, we say that consumers try to maximize their utility subject to a budget constraint. And this is just a basic macro or microeconomic idea about how consumers make purchases, which is important to thinking through innovation. And on that budget constraint, it's pretty easy to understand. If you only have $5 in your pocket and no money in the bank, and somebody tries to sell you something worth $10, you're probably not going to be able to buy it. But we can relax that budget constraint in modern times using credit cards, and that's one of the reasons why we have debt issues in the country, is that somebody no longer that just earns $2,000 a month, they can now have access to a credit card that, say, has a max of $10,000, so they're relaxing their budget constraint. And as we try to always maximize our margin utility, as we relax our budget constraint, we actually may purchase more. One of the things to understand that we are currently seeing increased economic growth throughout our world, and by 2050 we expect to have 10 billion people with heightened levels of income inhabiting our globe. And as incomes rise, as people become more educated, more affluent, the level of consumer margin utility that is based on the moral and ethical portions of your utility function tend to increase. And I know that the use of the term the utility function can come across as kind of esoteric, but or too academic, I should say. But utility is just saying is how it makes you feel when you buy something, that it's making you happy or it's making you feel satisfied. So it's a matter of satisfaction. And oftentimes when one doesn't have a lot of money, they are just trying to buy or purchase what they can get by with. And if we think about this in food products, they will buy the cheapest product that's available with hopefully the best nutritional quality, and as they relax the amount of money, or when their budget constraint is relaxed, they're able to move into satisfying moral and ethical factors that they care about. And these are the things that make us feel good at the end of the day when we purchase something. And for this sake, I just want to use food as a representation of this consumer decision making. When we look at a product in the marketplace, food, for instance, there's what we call search goods, and there's also experience goods. And the vast majority of stuff that's sold in the marketplace today falls under the category of experience goods. These are things that you have to touch, taste, and feel. You have to experience to really figure out whether or not they're maximizing your margin utility, if it's something you actually care to buy again. And within this, there are two different product attributes that we usually talk about when we talk about food and agriculture products, and also are related to consumer products in general. The first is experience attributes. Those are, again, the things you can touch, taste, and feel. And the second element is something to have in the back of your head, is what we call credence attributes. Some economists actually bust out credence attributes and make it a whole separate good class, but different schools of thought still keep it just as a subtype of attributes. Credence attributes, though, are moral and ethical elements and societal values, and consumers tend to rely on a trust mechanism. These are the things that, again, you can't touch, taste, and feel, but they evoke an emotion within you. It's something that, as you go to bed at night or you're in a buying situation, it just makes you feel good. And it makes you feel as if you're doing something that maybe makes the world a better place, or maybe that, is environmentally friendly, or maybe is helping out somebody that is in need. And this is just a little description of going into these credence attributes, but in the case of when we talk about food, again, that's touch, taste, and feel, are more of the experience, and the credence stuff are things that you can't touch, taste, and feel. For instance, if you're buying a pair of shoes and it says that, for every shoe you buy, they're going to donate shoes to somebody that can't afford shoes, you really don't know if they're ever doing that, because you can't really actually see that on the product outside of them branding a story and telling you about it, and you have to just trust them. This is just a basic model that I want to just present that people can think through. This is a model that I developed about 12 years ago, and I should say that when you see the instrumental values in that, that's something that came out of some work by Jason Lusk and a few other agriculture economists over 15 years ago. And the rest of this is just a hodgepodge of generally accepted concepts about how consumers make food choices, but this also can apply to voting choice. It's kind of a consumer or a citizen or person decision-making model. And within that, it's that individuals have core and instrumental and terminal values, and they have preferences in the marketplace. And you're able to build these things through the experiences you have and the factors of socialization that act on you, whether it's your school, your church, synagogue, mosque, your friend network, your workplace, really all combined together to affecting an individual and how they make a consumption decision. So having given you what may make no sense at this point, a very high-level overview of the consumer decision-making model, I want to revisit back to this concept of the necessary and sufficient condition of a business, which is having a paying customer, and then asking ourselves, in the concept of innovation in Montana, if you're a business owner or you work with businesses, who do we define as that customer? In the work that I've done with the Food and Ag Development Center, and I think my other colleagues that work in economic development in Montana would say that many entrepreneurs, as they wake up in the morning, what they're focused on is the Montana market. And in fact, over the 6 years that I've lived in this state, I would say that the level of consumer ethnocentrism, which would be the preference of Montana consumers to buy a Montana good, is extremely high in comparison to other states that I've lived and worked in. And because of this, you get a lot of people that are focused simply on, let's say, Great Falls or Missoula or Billings, or if you're in Shoto where I live, only on Shoto. And they see this as a Montana brand and branding it specifically to consumers in Montana. However, if we revisit that definition of innovation that I first talked about, innovation requires successful commercialization or dissemination of an idea, a process, a good, or a service. And Montana's rural areas and many of our towns and cities, as we know, are really hungry in a need for economic development. And jobs can be created through innovation. So the question that I throw back on people is us asking ourselves, where is the marketplace? For have successful innovation in Montana, we have to be able to start busting the mold, whether it's a food tech company, or it's somebody that wants to start a bakery, or it's somebody that wants to, advance a software as a service model, is to understand we only have a little over 1 million citizens within Montana. This is just a small fraction of the people that live in New York City or in Los Angeles County. And to define Montana as a marketplace for innovation alone loses sight of the potential possibilities that individuals in our state have, regardless of whether or not they live up in Sheridan or Daniels County, or they live in Yellowstone County. And we have to remember that we have an excess of 300 million Americans, and we have an excess of 7 billion inhabitants on our planet Earth. And that we have to then say, okay, is our marketplace Montana, or is our marketplace the world, and should we shoot for the stars? My feeling is that we have to always focus on where that marketplace is, and that's outside the state of Montana, and it's in some regional markets that we should focus more on. So, having said some of that, again, innovation is that process rooted in the identification of problems, the development of solutions, the ability of those solutions to be accepted by and produce benefit within the marketplace. So when we think through this innovation, as all of us, so everyone that's listening to me go on about this today, we're all people, we're all end users, and we're all consumers. And we have the ability as people and as end users and as consumers to identify problems and develop solutions for the marketplace. The world, in reality, our everyday life, is our laboratory. If you remember, I said innovation is not restricted to somebody with a PhD sitting in a laboratory in some far-flung high-tech location. Our laboratory, every single one of us, is capable of innovation. In fact, if somebody's interested in delving more into this subject, Professor Eric von Hippel at MIT Sloan has done an exorbitant amount of work that's all available in open source manners of talking about this innovation and really driving into the power of democratization of innovation, as well as especially drilling down into user innovation. And to give you an idea of some of the things that we see commonplace in Montana that are the result of user innovation, one of them is center pivot irrigation. Was a farmer that actually developed that, was a user of irrigation. It wasn't a company sitting in a laboratory that came up with that idea. Another one that's commonly talked about are mountain bikes, and another one, of course, is a baby jogger. So all these things that we oftentimes see are things that were actually developed by the users. Now, what's often happened, though, is when users develop an idea, you need a producer to actually commercialize it and put it out into the marketplace. And with everything that we've seen in the growth and development of our economy over the past 100 years, and with advanced telecommunications, regular jet service, and the World Wide Web, we know that users, whether or not they're in Brady, Montana, or whether they're not in New York City, have the capacity to develop their own product. Now, one of the things within that development of products, there was a guy named George Akerlof, a very well-regarded economist, George Akerlof, back in 1970, that wrote a groundbreaking journal article called "The Markets for Lemons: Quality Uncertainty and the Market Mechanism." And this was him really getting in and talking about what we call asymmetric information, the chance for market failures, and what he called adverse selection. And adverse selection is the idea of good or bad products pushing out good products. So if you had 4 products in front of you and you had no way of telling which one was actually better, and if you tried the bad one first, it may result in you never buying the good product. And back in 1970, what he put forward was that consumers facing uncertainty in the marketplace actually benefit from brands that they can connect to and that they can gain adherence, or that the brands can gain adherence of those consumers, as well as chains was another concept that he had. So when we talk about innovation, one of the things that, when we talk about brands specifically, is that we need to be able to start looking at our own individuality and to understand that we are people, and that we have to be able to come more in tune with who we are actually when we try to develop an innovation or an innovation. And so when we talk about branding specifically, the ability to brand something in the marketplace, I just want to take a step back and say that when I use that, I use a very ample viewpoint of that, even beyond what marketing texts you use. And brand is everything. For me, it's the experience that you have as you go into somebody's restaurant. It's the experience you have when you're dealing with somebody on customer service. Every interaction that a customer has with your brand or with your company or a service or a process, I tend to define as a brand. When we look specifically at us as individuals, we all have different values, both instrumental and terminal and core values. We care about family, we care about love, we care about freedom, we care about independence, we care about diversity. We also have our own being and meaning, who we are and what we are, and we also have our own life experiences. Separate from that, within us, we are, as we know, anybody that's employed, we sell our labor on a daily basis to somebody else that values us as a human resource unit. And so when we're looking at innovation, we recognize that our whole person is able to interact and look at the world and to identify problems and come up with solutions. And within that, the strength of innovation is found by funneling that through our own sense of creativity and really challenging ourselves to step out of our traditional roles and to take upon a non-traditional role. So if one is a caregiver at home, or somebody is an accountant, or somebody is a gas station attendant, to really recognize that they are able to observe everything in the market, quite a few things in the marketplace, and that we should challenge ourselves not to accept the role that the marketplace has given us and to drive our internal creativity. If we want to fine-tune our ability to be innovators, we also can, we can add to our human resource unit. That's, changing our education, taking classes, working out better, fine-tuning our minds, maybe drawing ourselves out of depression. But really, some of those values and the being and meaning are important, because as you become an innovator and you develop a product or you develop a company, knowing who you are and putting that within your brand and keeping your brand true to who you are provides authenticity to customers and also allows customers to feel as if they're connected back to something. So as we're doing this as individuals, as innovators, it's one, coming into connection with who you are, refining who you are, but also training yourself, if you're going to find problems and develop solutions, is to always question, to think about it, to question it, and to dare to create something. And part of that creation, we find when we get into that creation mode, is that increasingly we're finding that collaboration with other individuals, people that are interested in solving problems, somebody that might have a good idea about collaboration, is beneficial to us. I want to throw this quote out here. This is a quote from Joseph Campbell that was done over a period of PBS interviews with him. And, I think this sums up quite a bit of when we look at that consumer behavior I talked about earlier, and us as our own people developing products. He said that people say what we're all seeking is meaning of life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive. so that our experiences on the purely physical plane will have resonances within our own innermost being and reality, so that we actually feel the rapture of being alive. As we focus on trying to improve businesses in Montana, as we try to develop new innovations and commercialize these things in the marketplace, I find these words to really be a guidepost that we should follow. Is that individuals are looking for a way to be alive. They're looking for a way to find and connect back to the most basic principles and elements of who they are, and they want to connect with a community and with potentially a brand that will allow them to feel as if they're connecting with the same in that brand. So, shifting once again within this, when we look at an existing business and trying to provide a great amount of value to our customers and to come up with great ideas and then properly commercialize them, it's beneficial to really switch out of the traditional business mindset that can come from the traditional business planning modules. And these are things that focus on product profitability, current sales, brand equity, and market share. And this idea here actually is something that was first published in the Harvard Business Review back in 2010, and has really found quite a big home in many large corporations and smaller as well. But I think it's of value for people to really think about this when they're driving innovation. So when we talk about product profitability, we can't just focus on we make a widget for $1, we can sell it for $2. We have to focus on the fact that when the customer is buying from our brand or buying from our company, that they're getting a profitable experience from it. So remember that consumer decision-making model of that consumer utility subject to a budget constraint. They need to feel that their utility, who they are, is benefiting from the relationship. And so we need to be able to re-envision how we do sometimes on our product pricing to essentially give that profitability, or how we can bring different elements into an experience or into, as I said, our whole brand concept that provides that profitability. The other thing is to get out of the mindset of looking at current sales. So if you were a business owner and you want to drive innovation and you want to match the needs of consumers, you want to commercialize products, you don't want to be looking at, I sold 5 widgets today. I made $200. What you want to say is, I got a new customer today, and I know because the way that I'm building my brand, and my brand is not focused just on Montana, it's focused on the world, and it has basic core elements to it that speak directly to who I am, and they connect with others. And I'm providing a high quality product that is meeting the needs of consumers, and I'm providing profitability to the customer. That I know when I get a new customer that 80% of them are going to come and buy something from me every 2 years. So you want to drive customer lifetime value instead of just current sales. The other thing is brand equity is this idea of how much a brand is worth. So let's say Kellogg's or Heinz, all these large consumer product brands. It's best really to look at customer equity, and customer equity is saying if we took all the lifetime values of our customers and we combined them all together, that's how much we're actually worth. It's not some number that's just taken out of the sky. It's based upon our customers and their connection from the utility function and their budget constraints back into our brand that's driven by who we are. Now, final is getting out of talking about market share and moving more into customer equity share, which is saying, I don't want to talk about, really that I only have 10% of the market, but I want to know how much, equity share each one of my customers have of that lifetime value. So continue on that concept of the customer mindset value is of looking at unit economics, and these are things that have been used by MIT Sloan's Discipline Entrepreneurship Program, and there's actually a link on that to give attribution and to show you a book that I find of value to look at. And this is, if we're always thinking about customers, then we want to drive that customer focus into what we do. So we need to develop personas. We have to understand who's actually buying something. And when we can do that, we can develop customer lifetime values. We can really dig in and identify essentially customer decision-making units, and then be able to figure out from customer decision-making units how hard it is actually to get a customer, and so then we can come up with a cost of customer acquisition. And in early business stages, as one is going through the ideations of innovation and different product designs or different systems designs, that when looking at this customer lifetime value and cost of customer acquisition, by really understanding customers, you can tell early on whether or not you're going to have success in the marketplace, or you need to pivot and you need to choose a different beachhead market. And a beachhead market is an example. There's a company called Anchor Nutrition Bar that is a anti-nausea bar, and it was founded by an individual whose sister was pregnant, and he came up with this traditional Korean folk remedy that was put into a bar that would help nauseous women. But when he started to really understand customer lifetime value and the cost of the customer acquisition, he recognized that women don't spend their entirety of their lives having babies, and they're not the entirety of their lives, they're not necessarily nauseous. So he had to switch gears to a different beachhead market to find where he had a higher lifetime value of the customer set and where that cost of customer acquisition was lower. And actually he found that all those were better suited for actually the boating or sailing community, where there are still quite a few people that like to go on boats but have nausea problems. And that was a much better market for them to hit rather than just that. And so really, when we look at unit economics and we build in a customer mindset and we incorporate that into a lean startup mentality, we're able to truly drive innovation in the marketplace that allow us to meet consumer demand. And I think that, again, whether or not you're located in far eastern Montana, or you're just here in Great Falls, you're in Bozeman or Missoula, or if you're anywhere else in the country, we have to really understand, again, where are those consumers, and remember, we can't just focus on consumers here in Montana. And the only other thing that I wanted to just point out on when we look at unit economics, what we're looking at that again is it's really trying to look at profitability when we're focusing on consumers and how we're approaching them rather than just revenue, because on that lifetime value, it wants to speak back to our brand and it wants to speak back to who we are. So this is just a food for thought, and I'm hoping to open it up to any questions that somebody may have. I think I'm a little bit over time. I apologize. This was a lot of concepts I wanted to work through to kind of just get people to think a little bit differently about the concept of innovation here in the state. These pictures I took, I was brought down to Auckland, New Zealand to keynote a protein conference there. And as I was walking around Auckland, I took these pictures, and this is just to give you an idea of product or brand marketing that I found unique. I had not seen this in the United States. I joked when I was in New Zealand that this is a product that apparently is an alcohol product that is a flavored seltzer that we're seeing become more popular in the United States. But this one is saying essentially, drink our product, have a good time, and save elephants or save sharks. And so this is an idea of just showing you some of this concept of brand identity that connects consumers into something. And as we connect consumers into a brand, they buy more, and it allows space for that commercialization factor with innovation. So at any rate, sorry, that was quite a bit of random things to go through, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. We do have a few minutes for questions. If anyone would like to type them in the Q&A box. Barnett, while folks are doing that, is it okay if I share your email address and website in the Q&A box?
Yes, my correct email would be great.
All right, will do. And Barnett, if you want, I could read those out, or if you want to just read it yourself. Looks like Jason is just...
Okay.
Jason just said, for anyone who out there who would like to make practical any of these concepts, who would you recommend the attendees connect with, Barnett?
I would be happy to connect with anybody in this space. As I said, anything that falls within our product, my my category of stuff. I work primarily in the Golden Triangle, but also for the benefit of Montana. And then I'd be happy to refer anybody to SBDC directors that would cover the whole breadth of Montana. And I think that we're going to see some emergence hopefully over the course of the next year, both MSU and University of Montana doing some different innovation initiatives out into rural areas.
Great. And Heather has a question. Do these principles apply well for services as well as goods?
Yeah, they provide equally. It's one for one. It's 100% equal between services as well as goods. They're exactly, I'd say they're exactly the same, except for services. The only thing you really have sometimes with certain types of services is the experience that's associated with it. You don't sometimes have an end product, but a plumber or a daycare person sometimes can have actually an end product there. But either way, it's exactly the same, I would say.
Wonderful. Gloria says, I have a whole new understanding of innovation. Thanks so much. Thank you, Gloria. We've got another minute for questions if anybody would like to type them in. While you're doing that, I'll just remind participants that our next webinar is Thursday, October 3rd. Tyler Menzel will be the presenter. He's the marketing specialist with the Great Falls Small Business Development Center, and he'll be talking about marketing on LinkedIn. Jason's reminding us to please complete the surveys. These surveys help us keep these webinars free, and he just sent them out. So look for those of you that that had registered for this webinar. Barnett, any last words from you before we close things out?
No, I guess it was kind of I apologize, it was kind of a long trek to try to get through to try to talk about innovation. I'm happy to engage with people a little bit more in talking about these subjects. My hope is just that it opens us to understand that innovation is within each and every one of us, and that in the day and age that we live, an individual that's in Brady or Bynum, Montana, has an equal opportunity to be able to change the world as somebody that lives in New York City or New Delhi or Auckland, New Zealand. And that really ourselves, if we're able to recognize that we can wake up and we can work with other people in our communities, but also recognize that we may be able to work virtually with somebody in a city far away to come up not only with the invention or the creation side of innovation, but also the commercialization. I think that as we start to focus more of that here in Montana and recognize the world as our market, that we can see substantive economic change, as well as we drive that economic change. Really my hope and goal, and I would say the whole of other economic developers in this state, is to say if we can change these upstream forces that can help change social situations, whether it's high levels of addiction, marginal workers, and others within our state, that it's something that I have quite a bit of faith that we can accomplish.
Wonderful. Barnett, thanks very much. Great point to end on, and I want to thank you for the great presentation, and also our participants today for joining us. We hope to see you next for the next webinar, October 3rd, and I will be sending the archive link out to our listserv, and again, all that information is on our website that I posted at the top of the Q&A thread. So with that, wish you all a very good day, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.